The air inside the old rehearsal studio felt heavy, thick with a mixture of stale coffee, cold cigarette smoke, and the kind of tiredness that settles into your bones after a very long day. It was a basement room, buried deep below the noisy streets of the city, with concrete walls that had been painted a dull, peeling gray years ago. The overhead lights buzzed with a low, humming sound that seemed to vibrate right through your teeth. It wasn't a glamorous place. It wasn't a place where dreams usually came true. It was a place for work, and for the group of people sitting in the room, it was just another Tuesday afternoon. Scattered around the room on mismatched chairs and cracked wooden stools were the musicians. They were a rough-looking bunch, men and women who had seen it all and played it all twice. They were some of the best players in the city, known for being sharp, fast, and unforgiving. But today they looked bored. The double bass player was leaning back against the wall, his eyes closed, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on his knee that had nothing to do with the music on the stand in front of him. The piano player was rubbing his temples, staring at a spot on the floor as if he was trying to burn a hole through it. The drummer was slowly twirling a drumstick in his right hand, looking at the door every few seconds with a look that clearly said he would rather be anywhere else in the world. They were pros, and they were cynical. They had seen hundreds of singers come through that door, young, hopeful, full of energy, and most of them couldn't hold a tune when it really mattered. The only person standing was the conductor. He was a man who commanded respect without having to ask for it, mostly because everyone was a little bit afraid of him. He stood in the front of the room, his back to the singers, hunched over a music stand covered in a messy stack of papers. He was erasing something furiously with a pencil, the scratching sound echoing loudly in the quiet room. Every few seconds he would stop, tap the paper hard with the eraser end of the pencil, mutter something under his breath, and go back to erasing. He was a perfectionist, and he was in a bad mood. The session was running late. The acoustics in the room were terrible, and he was not in the mood to deal with an amateur. When the heavy metal door at the back of the room creaked open, nobody jumped. In fact, hardly anyone moved. A young woman stepped inside, letting in a brief gust of cold air and the sound of distant traffic before the door clicked shut behind her. She looked small standing there in the doorway. Her coat was clean but simple, and she clutched a worn black folder against her chest like it was a shield protecting her heart. Her name was Anya. She wasn't famous. She didn't have a manager or a record deal. She was just a girl with a powerful voice and a flyer she had seen in a coffee shop that morning. Anya stood there for a moment, waiting for someone to tell her where to go. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the scuffed floors, the tangled cables running across the ground like snakes, and the tired faces of the musicians. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had practiced for this. She had spent every spare moment of the last 3 weeks singing scales in her tiny apartment until her neighbors probably hated her. But standing here, in the cold light of this basement, she felt completely out of place. The silence in the room wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a waiting silence, a silence that felt like it was judging her before she even opened her mouth. Finally, the conductor turned around. He didn't smile. He didn't say hello. He just looked at his watch, then looked at her, his eyes narrowing behind his thick glasses. "You're the 4 o'clock?" he asked. His voice was flat, devoid of any warmth or curiosity, and nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I'm Anya. I came about the session vocalist spot." The conductor sighed, a long, dramatic sigh that seemed to deflate his whole body. He turned to the piano player. "Did we not finish the list yet? I thought we were done for the day." "Last one," the piano player said, not even looking up. "Then we can go." "Fine," the conductor snapped. He turned back to Anya. "Well, don't just stand there. Come in and make it quick. We are all tired, and nobody here wants to listen to someone who doesn't know what they are doing." Anya walked carefully toward the center of the room, stepping over the thick cables. The floorboards creaked under her shoes. She could feel the eyes of the musicians on her now. It wasn't a friendly look. It was the look people give you when they are just waiting for you to mess up so they can go home. The drummer stopped twirling his stick and looked at her, his expression skeptical. He had seen 1,000 girls like Anya, pretty faces who thought they could sing because their friends told them they were good at karaoke. He didn't expect her to last 5 minutes. She reached the microphone stand. It was an old, heavy silver stand that wobbled slightly. She placed her folder on the music rack and tried to adjust the height of the mic. It was stiff. She pulled it, and it screeched loudly, a high-pitched metallic squeal that made everyone in the room wince. "Sorry," Anya whispered, her face flushing red with embarrassment. "Just sing," the conductor barked. He picked up his baton. "We don't have time for a sound check. Start on measure 4. Do you know the chart?" I haven't seen this specific song before," Anya stammered. "But I can read music." "If I can look it over for a second, no time for sight reading today," the conductor interrupted. He sounded annoyed. "We need someone who can just perform. This isn't a school lesson." He looked at the bass player. "Give her the standard blues progression in B-flat. Let's just see if she has pitch." The room filled with a groan. The bass player lazily plucked a string. The piano player hit a few chords, sounding bored and mechanical. It was the most basic, uninteresting music they could play. It was musical torture, designed to bore someone to death. Anya felt her heart sink. This wasn't what she prepared for. She wanted to show them her range, her control, her ability to tell a story. Instead, they were giving her a lazy background track and expecting her to entertain them. She looked at the conductor, hoping for a chance to explain, to show him the songs in her folder. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the clock on the wall, his foot tapping impatiently. "Whenever you're ready," the piano player said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The atmosphere was suffocating. The cynicism in the room was like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Anya closed her eyes for a split second. She thought about the early mornings, the late nights, the rejection letters she had stuffed in a drawer at home. She thought about the reason she loved music. It wasn't about the fame or the money. It was about the feeling of connecting with something real, something that couldn't be seen. She realized that these people, these talented but bitter musicians, had lost that spark. They were just going through the motions. She opened her eyes. The fear was still there, clawing at her throat, but underneath it, something else was starting to burn. A quiet, steady determination. She tightened her grip on the microphone stand. She wasn't going to let them send her away without proving who she was. If they wanted to give her the hardest song, she would sing it. If they wanted to bore her to tears, she would find the emotion in the boredom. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the dusty air of the basement, and prepared to fight for her place in that room. The conductor raised his baton, ready to cut her off at the first mistake, but he didn't know that the girl standing in front of him wasn't there to play games anymore. She was there to work, and she was ready to show them exactly what she was made of. The room fell silent, waiting for the first note, completely unaware that their boring Tuesday afternoon was about to become a memory they would never forget. The conductor's hand shot up in the air, a sharp, violent motion that cut through the music like a knife. The piano player immediately lifted his hands from the keys, letting the chord hang in the air for a split second before fading into silence. The drummer stopped tapping his foot. The room, which had been filled with the sound of a standard blues routine just moments before, suddenly felt very quiet again. Anya stood by the microphone, her hands still resting on the stand, waiting for a comment or a critique. She had sung the notes perfectly, keeping time with the band, adding a little bit of soul to the boring progression they had given her. She thought she had done well. "That is enough," the conductor said, his voice low and unimpressed. He didn't look at her. He was busy digging through the messy pile of papers on his stand again, shuffling them with aggressive flicks of his wrist. "You have a nice tone. It is pleasant. But pleasant does not pay the bills, and pleasant certainly does not save this session. We have 50 people who can sing pleasant. I need someone who can sing fire." Anya felt a small sting of frustration. She had done exactly what they asked. She had sung the boring song, and she had sung it well. But looking at the conductor's back, she realized that pleasing him wasn't the point. He was testing her, pushing her to see if she would fight back or if she would just shrink away. He was looking for a reason to send her home, but he also wanted to see if there was a spark buried underneath the nervousness. "All right," the conductor muttered, more to himself than to the room. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the bottom of the stack. It was thicker than the others, heavy paper that had been handled by many hands over the years. It was yellowed at the edges, and the notes on the page were cramped and dense, looking like a swarm of black ants fighting for space. He smoothed it out on the music rack with a heavy thud. The piano player leaned forward, squinting at the page. When he saw what it was, his eyes went wide, and he let out a low, surprised whistle. The drummer stopped spinning his stick and sat up straighter, leaning in to get a better look. Even the bass player opened one eye, looking genuinely curious for the first time all afternoon. The mood in the room shifted instantly. It was no longer just bored. It was tense, electric, with a sudden, dangerous anticipation. The conductor turned to face Anya, a cold, almost cruel smile playing on his lips. "You want the job? You want to prove you aren't just another pretty voice with no depth? Then sing this." Anya looked down at the music. At first, she didn't quite understand what she was looking at. It didn't look like a song. It looked like a mathematical equation gone wrong. The key signature was full of sharps and flats, 5 of them. The time signature kept changing, switching from a slow, heavy count to a frantic, sprinting pace every few bars. And the notes. She traced the vocal line with her eyes, and her breath hitched in her throat. It started low, deep in the basement of a singer's range, a gravelly, chest-heavy note that required power and control. Then, without a moment to breathe, it shot up. It climbed higher and higher, past the comfortable middle, past the money note that most pop singers hit to impress a crowd. It went up into the stratosphere, hitting a high E that was usually reserved for opera singers or sopranos with years of classical training. She saw the markings on the page. Crescendo, fortissimo, diminuendo, rubato. It demanded everything. It demanded she sing as soft as a whisper and then as loud as a siren, sometimes within the same second. There were intricate runs, fast groups of notes that had to be sung cleanly, perfectly in tune, skipping up and down the scale like a stone skimming across water. It was a vocal maze. One wrong step, one missed breath, and the whole thing would collapse. "This is the red sky," the conductor said, crossing his arms over his chest. "It is written for a specific type of voice. A voice made of steel. Most singers, even the ones with record deals, refuse to touch it. They try and they fail. They crack on the transition. They run out of breath on the bridge. Their throats give out before the finale." He took a step closer to her, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "This is the test. If you can sing this, if you can hit every note and sell every emotion, the job is yours. No more auditions. But if you miss it, if you even squeak, you walk out that door and you don't come back. Are we clear?" Anya stared at the paper. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her ears. This wasn't just hard. It was unfair. It was a trap. They knew she wasn't a classical opera star. They knew she was a session singer trying to make a living. Giving her this song was like asking a sprinter to run a marathon in the middle of a hurricane. They wanted to see her crash. They wanted to see the humiliation on her face when her voice betrayed her. The smirks on the faces of the musicians confirmed it. The drummer was looking at her with a mixture of pity and amusement. Already anticipating the train wreck, she wanted to refuse. She wanted to say, "That is too hard," grab her coat, and leave with her dignity. But then she remembered the empty refrigerator at home. She remembered the stack of bills on her kitchen counter. She remembered the years of singing in empty halls for free. This was a doorway, and it was locked with the hardest lock she had ever seen. But she had to try to pick it. "I can try," Anya said. Her voice sounded small, but it didn't shake. The conductor raised an eyebrow. "Confidence. Good, let's see if it is justified." He turned to the band. "Gentlemen, take it from the top. Give her the intro. And be sharp. If she gets lost, do not wait for her." The piano player placed his hands on the keys, his expression serious now. The conductor raised his baton. The air in the room felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Anya took a deep breath, trying to loosen the tension in her shoulders. She looked at the music, memorizing the first few lines, mapping out the path in her mind. She knew she had to treat it like a mountain. She couldn't look at the peak. She just had to look at the ground right beneath her feet. One step at a time? Ready? The conductor barked. And 1, 2, 3, 4. The piano began to play. It wasn't the boring blues anymore. It was a thunderous, rolling introduction that filled the small basement room, echoing off the concrete walls. It was beautiful, but it was scary. The complexity of the music was immediate. Anya gripped the microphone stand until her knuckles turned white. She closed her eyes for a second, blocking out the conductor, the drummer, the smirks. She had to become the music. She couldn't sing at them. She had to sing through them. The piano swelled, building up to the moment where she had to come in. The hardest song she had ever seen was waiting for her, and the only way out was through. The silence that followed the piano's introduction was heavy, stretching out like a tight rubber band ready to snap. Anya stood in the center of the room, the microphone looming in front of her like a judge waiting to pass a sentence. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The dusty air, the buzzing lights, the conductor's impatient tapping foot, all of it seemed to hang in suspension. Her heart was beating so fast that it felt like a bird trapped in her chest, flapping its wings against her ribs. She looked at the music stand, but the notes on the page were starting to blur together. The fear she had pushed down in the hallway was suddenly back, screaming at her to turn around and run. This was a mistake, a voice in her head whispered. You are going to embarrass yourself. You are going to crack, and they are going to laugh. The conductor shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing as he waited. He had seen this before, the deer-in-the-headlights moment. He was already raising his hand to cut the audition short, to dismiss her before she even made a sound. He could see the panic in her eyes. To him, it was a sign of weakness. He didn't want weak. He wanted power, but then Anya did something unexpected. She didn't look at the conductor, and she didn't look at the scary notes on the page. She looked down at her feet. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs slowly until her shoulders dropped. She imagined the air she was breathing in was solid, heavy, grounding her to the floor. She made a choice in that split second. She decided that she didn't care if they laughed. She didn't care if the conductor was mean. She decided to stop trying to impress them and just sing the truth. She wasn't there to pass a test. She was there to make music. She closed her eyes. The room disappeared. The cynicism, the bad lighting, the fatigue, it all faded into the background. In her mind, she was standing in her own living room, safe and warm, singing just for the joy of it. The first note of the song was a low, resonant G, deep in the chest voice. Anya opened her mouth and let the sound out. It didn't come out shaky or small. It came out like a warm, dark wave washing over the room. She held the note, steady as a rock, feeling the vibration in her chest bones. It was a sound that demanded attention, not because it was loud, but because it was so pure. The piano player, who had been ready to noodle over any mistake she made, stopped playing. He held his chord, listening. His eyebrows rose slightly. He had expected a breathy, weak sound, the kind of noise beginners make when they are scared of the low notes. But this was different. This was professional. Anya moved to the next phrase. The music was tricky. It jumped around, requiring her to be precise with her pitch. She didn't just hit the notes. She landed on them with confidence. She treated the difficult intervals like a conversation, like she was telling a secret rather than performing a math problem. As she sang, she could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting. It wasn't a physical change, but she could feel it in her gut. The boredom was being replaced by curiosity. She kept her eyes closed, blocking out the visual distractions, which allowed her to focus entirely on her internal instrument. She felt the muscles in her throat relax, opening up like a flower. She wasn't forcing the sound. She was letting it flow. The tension in her jaw melted away. For the first few bars, she was just surviving, navigating the rocky path of the melody without falling off. But as she found her rhythm, something else started to happen. She started to enjoy it. The song was difficult, yes, but it was also beautiful. It was dramatic and full of emotion, a story of loss and redemption. Anya stopped thinking about the technique, where to breathe, how to shape the vowel sounds, and let herself feel the lyrics. The anger she felt at the conductor for being rude, the frustration of the long commute, the hunger of being an artist in a city that didn't care, she channeled all of it into the melody. The low notes became the weight of her struggle, and the melody became her attempt to rise above it. The musicians noticed the change immediately. These were professionals who played with their ears as much as their hands. They could hear the difference between someone singing notes and someone singing a story. The drummer, who had been looking at his watch, was now looking at Anya. He stopped spinning his stick and resting his hands on his knees. He heard the intensity in her voice, the way she was bending the rhythm just slightly, pushing against the beat to create tension. It was subtle, but it was brilliant. The conductor lowered his hand, but he didn't cut her off. He watched her face. He saw the calmness that had settled over her features. He saw the small, confident smile that tugged at the corner of her mouth as she nailed a particularly difficult run of fast notes. She was navigating the maze, and she wasn't even looking at the map anymore. Anya reached the end of the first verse. The music was building up, getting louder and more complex. The piano player was playing harder now, matching her intensity. The bass player had put down his cigarette and was plucking the strings with real focus. They weren't just accompanying her now. They were playing with her. They were reacting to what she was doing, following her lead. It was a magical moment that happens rarely in rehearsals, the moment where a group of strangers stops, being individuals, and becomes a single, breathing organism. She knew the hardest part was still coming. The bridge of the song was a minefield of high notes and dynamic shifts that required absolute control. But she didn't feel the panic anymore. The fear had been replaced by a quiet, burning resolve. She felt strong. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She took a breath, preparing for the climb. The air in the basement room seemed to crackle with energy. The cynical musicians were leaning forward in their seats, drawn in by the magnetism of her voice. The conductor stood motionless, his arms crossed, a look of shock and grudging respect beginning to form on his face. Anya wasn't just singing the song anymore. She was taking ownership of it. She was reaching into the soul of the difficult piece and pulling out the beauty that had been hidden inside. The girl who had walked in scared and small was gone, replaced by a powerful artist who was just getting started. The storm was about to break, and everyone in the room knew it. As the final vibration of the high note faded into the dusty air of the basement, the room didn't just go quiet, it went completely still. It was the kind of heavy, electric silence that you feel in your chest as much as you hear with your ears. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The piano player's hands were frozen over the keys, hovering like he was afraid to touch them. The drummer sat with his mouth slightly open, staring at Anya as if she had just landed from a different planet. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to stop for a moment. Out of respect for what had just happened, the echo of the music hung in the air like smoke, wrapping around everyone in the room. The cynicism, the boredom, the tiredness, all of it had been blown away by the force of her performance. The song that was supposed to be a trap, a cruel joke designed to make her fail, had been turned into something beautiful and raw. Anya stood in the center of the circle, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her hand was still gripping the microphone stand, her knuckles white. As the adrenaline began to slowly fade, she felt the physical ache in her throat and the sweat cooling on her forehead. She opened her eyes and looked around. The fear she had felt walking in was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of certainty. She saw the shock on their faces and she knew. She didn't need them to tell her she had done it. She could feel it. The conductor was the first to move. He slowly lowered his arms, letting the baton drop to his side. He didn't look at his watch. He didn't look at his music stand. He looked directly at Anya. For a moment, his expression was unreadable, his face still a mask of seriousness. But then, his shoulders slumped just a little, releasing the tension he had been holding all day. He reached up and took off his thick glasses, rubbing his eyes with a heavy sigh. When he put the glasses back on, The harshness was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by something that looked a lot like awe. He walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. The band members watched him, waiting. They had seen him rip people apart for missing a single note. They had seen him fire people on the spot for being unprepared. They held their breath, wondering if he would find something to pick apart. Some technical detail to critique. The conductor stopped a few feet in front of her. He looked at the young woman who, only 20 minutes ago, had been trembling in the doorway. He looked at the worn folder in her hand and the simple coat she was wearing. Then he looked back at her face. "I have been conducting this city for 30 years, the conductor said. His voice was quiet, not shouting or commanding for the first time all day. "I have worked with opera stars. I have worked with pop idols. I have worked with people who think they are God's gift to music. And in all that time, I have never heard anyone sing that bridge like that. Not even the composer?" He paused, looking back at the piano player, who nodded in agreement. The conductor turned back to Anya. "You didn't just sing the notes, Anya. You pulled the soul right out of that page and forced us to look at it. You took a mess of ink and paper and you turned it into a human being. That is a rare gift." Anya felt a warmth spreading through her chest, flushing her cheeks. She hadn't expected praise, especially not from him. "I just tried to sing how it felt," she said softly. "I didn't want to let the song down." A small, genuine smile cracked the conductor's stern face. It transformed him, making him look years younger. "Well, you certainly didn't let it down. You let it fly." He gestured around the room at the other musicians. "Gentlemen, I think we have found our voice. And frankly, it's better than anything we could have hoped for." The reaction from the band was instant. The tension that had held them in their seats snapped. The bass player stood up and gave her a slow, respectful clap. The drummer picked up his sticks and banged them rhythmically against the rim of the snare, a sign of high approval in the jazz world. The piano player stood up, walked over to her, and extended his hand. "Kid," he said, shaking his head, "you scared me to death. I thought you were going to fall off that high note, but you stuck the landing like a gymnast. I haven't had to play that hard in years." "Thank you." Anya shook his hand, a huge smile breaking across her face. "Thank you for following me," she said. "I could hear you changing with me." "It helped. We were just trying to keep up," the drummer joked from the back. Grinning widely, the conductor clapped his hands together, the sharp sound bringing the room back to order, though the mood was now light years away from where it started. All right. Enough celebrating. We are still behind schedule, and now we have real work to do." He walked back to his stand, but instead of looking at the clock, he started flipping through his music with fresh energy. "Anya, put that folder away. You won't need it. We are going to run it again, from the top. But this time, don't hold back. I want to see what else you can do." Anya placed her folder on a chair near the wall. She didn't need the safety net of her old music anymore. She stepped back up to the microphone, but this time, she wasn't the nervous girl from the hallway. She stood tall, her feet planted firmly on the dusty floor. She looked at the conductor, and he raised his baton. There was no malice in his eyes now, only anticipation. As the band started to play the intro again, the music felt different. It wasn't a test anymore. It was a collaboration. The sound filled the basement, flowing out the cracks in the door and into the street above. Anyone walking past might have paused for a second, wondering who was singing down there, wondering where that kind of power was coming from. They wouldn't know the story of the skeptical conductor or the bored musicians. They wouldn't know about the hardest song or the trap. They would only hear the masterpiece being born in the dark for the next hour. The basement was not a place of work, but a sanctuary. They played through the song again and again, tweaking the arrangements, adding nuances that only musicians of that caliber could find. Anya guided them with her voice, experimenting with different dynamics, sometimes whispering the verses until it was so quiet you could hear the street traffic outside, other times belting out the chorus with a force that rattled the window panes. The musicians were feeding off her energy, playing better than they had in months. They were having fun again when the session finally ended. The sun was going down, casting long orange shadows through the small windows near the ceiling. The musicians were packing up their instruments, chatting and laughing, the fatigue gone, replaced by the buzz of a good day's work. The conductor walked over to Anya, who was putting on her coat. "We have a recording session next week," he said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the eagerness in his voice. "I assume you are free? We have a few more songs that need your special touch." Anya smiled, zipping up her coat. "I'll be there," she said. "I wouldn't miss it." She walked to the heavy metal door, the same door she had been so scared to walk through just a few hours ago. As she pushed it open and stepped out into the cool evening air, the city felt different. The streets were still noisy, the traffic was still loud, and the people were still rushing by. But Anya felt lighter. The weight of the doubt was gone. She walked down the street, her hands in her pockets, humming the melody of the hardest song in the world. She knew that whatever came next, she could handle it. She had faced the cynics, she had sung the impossible song, and she had turned it into something beautiful. She wasn't just a singer anymore. She was a master, and the world was finally ready to listen.